Ahsoka, the latest Star Wars installment on Disney Plus, may have concluded its run with its season finale airing earlier this week, but it's going to be another 3 weeks before we see the rest of the Nielsen numbers, with the latest batch for episode 4 just reported yesterday. And there's been a lot of conversation out there about what the audience figures and the trends for that audience really are for Ahsoka. Well, today, we're going to try to answer that question with math. But if the trends that we exhibited between episode 3 and episode 4 in terms of minutes watched are any indication of where things are headed for this show in the ratings, it's not good news. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. And check us out every Sunday right here on Valiant Renegade for the live show, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's dive straight in from Nielsen. This was released on Thursday, October 5th, the week of September 4th through September 10th. As a reminder to the folks watching, Nielsen is always about a month behind when it comes to publicly releasing their streaming results on the website. So this is why we're only up to episode 4 of Ahsoka as of this chart. And you can see right here that Ahsoka has fallen from the 5th spot in the previous week to the 7th spot. And this is not on the overall streaming chart. Ahsoka doesn't even appear in the top 10 overall for streaming. You have to go over to original content. Episode 4 for Ahsoka dropped on Tuesday evening during this measurement week. And Nielsen measures from Monday morning at midnight, the first minute of Monday each week, till the final minute of Sunday, 7 days later. So the latest episode of Ahsoka, episode 4 on this chart, would have had about a 5-day and 6-hour run within that 7-day measurement period for Nielsen. This is why Disney has been pushing up the releases of these shows to earlier in the week so that they can hit these charts harder in the measurements. But with 4 episodes of Ahsoka out, 459 million minutes were consumed during that week. And as a reminder, that's not just episode 4. Yes, this is the week that episode 4 dropped, but that tally, all the tallies on this chart, are the cumulative watch time that would have been consumed for the entire show, at least during that measurement week. So 7th place, 459 million minutes consumed, not too shabby. Fine, maybe so, but what we have to look at is what is happening to the audience week over week. What does the audience from the previous 2 weeks look like compared to now, and where is this going down the road? Well, we have those projections. This is a spreadsheet that I've custom designed to track streaming trends on Nielsen. In this case, we're going to start with Ahsoka. It's the first time I've done this, and I think this will be an interesting experiment for a lot of shows going forward, at least the ones that drop episodically. The ones that drop in a binge model, like those on Netflix, it's much more difficult to measure because everything is available at one time. It's hard to detect what the audience trend lines really are versus the episodic week-to-week release. How many people are really sticking around through the entire season or from episode to episode? We can see that much more clearly with the way Disney does things. So on your screen, if you look up in the top left-hand corner, for episodes 1 and 2, which of course dropped concurrently in the first week that Ahsoka premiered, a total of 829 million minutes watched were measured by Nielsen. That sets an initial baseline for us. Now, I want you to pay attention to that first column next to the episodes, right to the right, the episode runtime. This is a critical piece of measurement to determine how the viewership is actually going week over week. Episodes 1 and 2 clocked in at 97 minutes combined. Now, as you notice in that first square, I've only got 92 minutes. But if you look down below, you can see what I've done. I adjusted the week 1 runtime down by 5 minutes. That actually favors Ahsoka. That favors the watching on Disney Plus because of the additional end credits roll. Each and every week after this, we're only getting a single episode of Ahsoka. In the first week, we got 2. That means there was 2 beginning and end credits rolls. Most people aren't going to watch both sets. But to make it fair and compare it to the runtimes, the singular runtimes of the singular episodes each subsequent week, I've decided to adjust out 5 minutes from the watch time to give it a bit of a boost and make this fair. Now, in the second week, episode 3, which was measured by Nielsen last Thursday, we talked about those numbers, had a 35-minute runtime. That is, if you look 2 columns over, a week over week, or WOW runtime delta, or the change in the runtime, was down 61.96%, meaning that episode was 61.96% shorter than the first week where we got episodes 1 and 2. That's the runtime variance. The minutes watched that Nielsen measured, 487 million. Now, the week-over-week minutes watched change actual only dropped 41.25%, not 61.96%. That's an overperformance of 54.42. If you look towards the right and you see week-over-week perceived audience delta, or change expected versus actual. So what does all that mean? It means that if the audience behavior from the first week to the second week stayed consistent, then we would have expected a much greater drop than what we saw in viewership habits based on the loss of 61, almost 62% of runtime between the first 2 episodes and just the third by itself. But what really happened was that second week, the third episode actually overperformed expectations based merely on runtime. Now, why is that the case? Why did it overperform by 54%? Well, chances are there were still a lot of new people coming in to watch the show. We were still in the first 7 days of the first 2 episodes release, Ahsoka's debut with episodes 1 and 2 just a few days before. So there's a lot of new eyeballs. There's also a lot of rewatching going on. A lot of people at that point are deciding, am I going to get into this show or not? So that would artificially perhaps drive those numbers up in that second measurement week, kind of like we saw here. But either way, it's good news for Disney in that case. But what's happened since then? Now that we have the third week in and episode 4, we have a lot more data that can give us a much cleaner perspective on where the trends for viewership on this Ahsoka show have gone. So like I said, episode 3, week 2 on Nielsen, 487 million minutes watched. We would have expected 315.38 million minutes, overperformance of 54%, but episode 4 came in at 459 million minutes, seemingly a steady hold. But if we make some adjustments, some very important adjustments, we get a different picture. Check out the runtime on episode 4, back in that first column on the left side, 38 minutes instead of 35. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but we have to account for it. The week-over-week runtime delta for that 4th episode was a positive 8.57%, meaning there was 8.57% more watch time in episode 4 than in episode 3. Week over week, the amount of actual minutes watched as captured by Nielsen dropped by 5.75%. That middle column, again, WOW minutes watched delta, the actual. So at the same time, we would have expected a greater amount of watch time over the 3rd episode because we had 8.5% more watch time available. We actually dropped back nearly 6%. What we should have seen if the audience had just repeated their behavior from the second week or episode 3, we should have seen 528,742,857 watch minutes measured by Nielsen. Again, if the audience did not change the habit at all, but apparently they did, what we got was a total swing of negative 13.19%, meaning that when you factor in the extra 8.57% of runtime, but the actual measured minutes watched fell by 5.75%, what you got was a minimum viewership loss of 13.19%. Now, no, we can't be certain if that simply meant that the same people were all there and chose to rewatch episode 3 and into episode 4 less than they had the previous week. We don't know if 25% of the audience went out and everybody else kept rewatching over and over again that 4th episode. But we can make some possible assumptions based on what the episode ended with. A lot of folks who've been watching the show and were excited for it, and God bless them, nothing personal against you. If you liked it, that's great. But you guys out there were very excited about the fact that at the end of episode 4, we got a cameo of the return of Anakin Skywalker, played by Hayden Christiansen. I got to imagine that a lot of you rewatched that episode multiple times. There was even a lot of folks, myself included, that said Disney probably should have done a Stranger Things Season 4 model, where they dropped the first 4 episodes at one time, gave it a break for a month, and then dropped episodes 5 through 8. The reason being that everybody would have been immediately able to consume their way through episode 4, get that teaser of Anakin coming back, get people talking about it, and then wait to move into the finale. But that's not the way they did it. It seems like by episode 3, a lot of people were starting to check out of the door because they weren't interested in the show, and it wasn't getting them engaged. And by the time we actually got to this 3rd week where Anakin does show up, at least briefly before his main appearance in episode 5, people had already checked out. So once again, that negative 13.19% or the 13.19% fall in viewership from week 2 to week 3 or episode 3 to episode 4, that's the minimum. It may be substantially higher with those audience members remaining having rewatched that reappearance of Anakin 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So what then going forward? Can we make a prediction that if the audience just holds on, if the same audience repeats their same behavior and stays engaged in the show after episode 4, after this Nielsen measurement that we just got, can we surmise what might happen with episodes 5, 6, 7, and episode 8, the big finale that just came out? Well, the answer, of course, is yes. So directing your attention towards the middle column here, the week over week or WOW minutes watched delta or change predicted with audience hold. So episode 4 should have given us 528 million minutes watched on Nielsen. It didn't, at least based on the runtime and the same audience habits happening. We actually got 459 million. But look at episode 5. The runtime is about to jump up from 35 and 38 minutes in the previous 2 measurement weeks to 51 minutes, the longest single episode yet left in the season's run. That's a 34% increase in runtime over episode 4 or the 3rd week of measurement on Nielsen. That should yield, based on the audience repeating its habits and all the audience doing the same thing they did the week before, at 616 million plus minutes on Nielsen next Thursday when they drop the episode 5 or week 4 numbers for Ahsoka. So that's what we're looking for. Look to the highlighted blue column right over my head here on the screen. 616 million minutes is what we're expecting. For episode 6, again, based on an audience hold and a drop in runtime from the 5th episode of 5.88%, 579.7 million minutes watched is what you would expect. Episode 7, it drops another 6.25% from the previous week from episode 6. That should yield 543 million some odd minutes watched. And for episode 8, the season finale, again, if the audience doesn't change a single habit and everybody shows up again and watches it in the same manner, 579.7 million minutes watched is what we would expect for that season finale. Now, one thing to be cognizant of is that episode 5, with the flashback to the Clone Wars, a young Ahsoka, and loads of Hayden Christiansen, I would expect, maybe not new audience coming in to watch it, but I would expect the existing audience that's still sitting on the show to watch that episode over and over again, probably more than they have any other episode to this point. Again, a possibility. But if the Nielsen numbers for this episode don't measurably change off of that baseline, then that means that the audience is still stagnant or decaying. And more likely with an episode like that, if the numbers stay relatively stagnant or tight to the chart in the predictions, it does mean the audience is decaying, at least in terms of number of different sets of eyeballs. See, the problem here is you can have 10 people rewatch a show 1 million times, or you can have 1 million people watch a show 10 times. I'd take the 1 million. But the reality is we just can't tell what the audience actually is at this point. But the indication seems to be that, yes, there is a significant amount of audience decay that is going on. Whether that trend will change or not in the coming weeks is yet to be determined. So for the final experiment, look up at the rightmost column right over my hat. And that's going to assume that that same 13.19% audience drop or decay that we had in this past Nielsen measurement week between episodes 3 and 4 happens again next week when episode 5 comes out and then holds at that level for the rest of the season. What we'll actually see next week, if that's the case, is 540 million minutes consumed for episode 5, or at least all the episodes available up through and including episode 5 that week. Again, because Nielsen is capturing every episode out, not just the one that comes out that week. Episode 6, that would fall from 579 to 509. Episode 7 would fall from 543 instead to 477 million. And episode 8 at 509 million again because, well, episodes 6 and 8 share the same runtime. Now, of course, if that 13.9% not only happens again this next week for episode 5 when Nielsen releases those numbers, but then continues to happen at a compounded rate for episodes 6, 7, and 8, those numbers are going to get even worse. I'm not necessarily expecting that to happen. I feel like the folks that have stuck around through episode 4 at least to get that tease of Anakin are probably going to hang out for the rest of the season. But honestly, it's not like this finale for Ahsoka has anywhere near the rewatchability of, say, Mando Season 2 finale. What's important to note is that the trend line for this show is just not in Disney's favor right now. And the reason that's a problem is because this show has a very similar budget to what we see from competitors like Stranger Things that we brought up before. That's a show that knocked it out of the park. Or how about House of the Dragon? The budgets are on par with that as well. House of the Dragon, if you recall, when it premiered, measured about 4.8 million views in its opening few days on Samba TV. And you can say what you want about Samba, but they do create an interesting measurement system as long as you're comparing it within Samba's own system. But House of the Dragon at 4.8 million views and a Samba measurement that then hit Ahsoka with 1.2 million views, that's literally 1/4 of House of the Dragon. That isn't good for Disney when you're spending the same amount of money to create these shows. How about Secret Invasion and everything else that just recently came out that did even worse? And by the way, it's not like they're making this up anywhere else. Disney is not exactly having Ahsoka merchandise fly off the shelves, or Ezra, or Hera, or Sabine. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to even find any such merchandise connected with this show. Yeah, some of these characters are still out there, but they're out there from their older form, meaning people like Hasbro haven't made anything new for this show. They're recycling stuff that they've had sitting in a warehouse since Star Wars Rebels. And shows like Star Wars and Marvel should be, if nothing else, merchandise drivers. And they're simply not. And this is exactly why Bob Iger and the Walt Disney Company have decided they have to scale back, not only on the budgets for these Disney Plus shows, but they have to scale back on the quantity of these big headline tentpole pieces that they're producing. It's just untenable in the long term. They're not driving audience participation. They're not driving new subs. They're not driving a lot of advertising dollars, at least not yet. But especially not for the budgets that they're allocating to these, and then usually going over budgets. Their expenditures on these shows are usually higher than what they're suggesting early on. And the reason all of that is coming to a head is because Disney for the last several years have been promising investors, the stockholders, that Disney Plus would be profitable by the end of fiscal year 2024. Well, we just began fiscal year 2024 6 days ago on October 1st. That means that Disney has less than 12 months at this moment to get Disney Plus into a profitable status. And that's going to start by cutting down on some of these $200+ million monsters. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are you still watching Ahsoka? Or rather, did you watch it all the way through to the final episode? Were you excited by it? Were you not? Did you find it kind of meh? Or did you just skip it altogether? Either way, the results that we're seeing on Nielsen week over week are not what Disney was hoping for. I can promise you that. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.